It says the brothers wanted him dead. They said, we'll throw him into one of these pits over here by the side, and we'll just say a wild animal consumed him, and let's see what will happen with his dreams. So Reuven hears them, and he says, why should we murder him, right? Let's not be quick. Why should we spill his blood? Throw him into the pit, and why should we directly kill him? Let him die in the pit. And his thought is, I'll take him and I'll bring him home. I'll bring him home to dad. So our sages said that if Reuven would have known that these verses are written about him in the Torah, he wouldn't have just said throw him into the pit. He would have ran out, grabbed Yosef, put him on his shoulders, and given him a piggyback ride all the way to his father's house. That's what Chazal say. Now that's a very big insight. That means that if we would think for a minute, your actions now are being spotlighted, right? A person sits in the privacy of a bathroom and he makes the mistake of taking a cell phone in there with him, and he thinks that no one knows what's going on in there, right? But what would happen if suddenly, someone would see what was going on in there? So then what would his behavior look like? So much of our ability to drive ourselves to being good people is the thought that, their Bonshom knows. If we can't live by that, which we generally can't, so then, our sages say that in the days of the Talmud, they also. So why am I having a hard time doing what he says? So I can give you a tool. It's hard, but it's an easy tool. You wear tefillin? So many of us wear tefillin every day, Baruch Hashem. It's a mitzvah to wear tefillin every day. So it says in the Torah and in the Shulchan Aruch that when you wear tefillin, you're supposed to have certain kavanot. You're supposed to think certain things when you wear tefillin. So you're supposed to think Hashem is the power that runs the world. Sounds obvious? Did you ever stop to think about it? I can tell you that when I put on my tefillin, I try to think that. And I suddenly realize I'm just doing lip service. I don't really mean it. And then you're supposed to think Hashem is the power that runs the world. That means every hurricane, every tornado, Hashem is the power. And He is in control of every form of governance. That means, what's his name, Zelensky? Is that how you pronounce it? Zelensky is a puppet. There's strings being pulled. He thinks that the president of Ukraine or Putin or Biden or Netanyahu or whatever. So they're all strings in the hands of Hashem. So Hashem is Baal HaKoach. He is master of every strength and every form of governance. And therefore I accept when I put on tefillin, I'm binding my arm and my thought to think the way He wants me to think and desire the way He wants me to desire. Try having that kavanah for 1 week. And then you ask yourself, am I a liar? I'm going to think this. When at some point when you're wearing tefillin, you should think this before you take it off. So those are 4 out of the 6 kavanot the person should have when they wear their tefillin. It says in Shulchan Aruch. This isn't like Kabbalistic who knows what. This is in Shulchan Aruch. So when a person tries to think that, so then they develop within themselves the real thought. I'm going to do what their Machon says, which sounds like it's easy. It's not. Am I supposed to speak this way to someone? Am I supposed to do this to someone? Am I supposed to say Lashon Hara? Just give over not nice things about people? There's a lot of things we do that it's hard, So okay, so it's a way of thinking which takes a lifetime to hone. So one of the tools we could use is what Chazal say about Reuven. If you would think for a minute that in the future people are going to know about this, it's going to be publicized, so it gives you the drive to do it, to do what's right. it's an important tool. You know, they have this thing on the internet where you have a partner. You know about this program? That everywhere you go on the internet, your partner sees where you are and you see where you can create partnerships where so that you could get around the filters. Right. So, okay. I trust that the kids know this stuff better than I do. Okay. So, whatever. So, we move on. So, when Yosef gets there, the Torah does a beautiful thing for us. It hides the story from us. It tells us they just took it off. They took off the garment. They threw him into the pit. And it was empty from water, but obviously that snakes and scorpions and whatever else was down there. And they went to have a meal. You will only find out in next week's parasha that the brothers will reminisce 22 years later, and they're going to start saying, boy, we should have listened. When he begged us and pleaded with us and said, please don't do this to me. And I said to you, Reuven says, I told you don't do anything bad to the kid. The Torah doesn't give us that part of the story here. And I believe that there's an educational message in this. We often, in today's day and age, there are things that we're desensitized to. I'll tell you something. When I was a kid, you didn't have kissing scenes. Forget immodesty. I'm talking about regular TV. You like, think of the Brady Bunch. You guys know what the Brady Bunch is? I don't think you ever see Mr. Brady kissing Mrs. Brady in the Brady Bunch. Right? They're a husband and wife. They're bringing up 6 kids, 3 boys, 3 girls. Right? And I don't think you ever have a scene like that, if I remember correctly. Look, I haven't hazarded my Brady Bunches in about 30, 40 years. But whatever, I'm saying, the concept I'm saying, when we were growing up, the world was not desensitized. You didn't use the word kill. Like today, it's like, big deal. There were a million words that today have become like, why not?
Swear words.
But it desensitizes you. There are things we should be sensitive to that, the media tells you about killings. Every 2 minutes there's a killing. Every 2 minutes there's a rape in the United States, right? There's a million horrible things that are going on. Now, when people hear about all these things, so they become desensitized. The first time it bothers you. The second time, kacha. By the third time, okay, no, this is life. It's not the way life should be. So when the Torah is going to tell us a story that has a lot of cruelty to it, so the Torah doesn't tell us the story. It's only 22 years later that the Torah is going to say, Halo amarti alechem. What do they say? When the viceroy of Egypt gives them a hard time, they say, Alachinu, this is all happening because of a brother, our brother Asher lo shamanu b'tzarat nafsho b'itchaneno eleinu velo shamanu. He begged us, and we didn't listen, the brothers say to one another. That's when you'll hear that Yosef begged. The Torah could have told you that here. The Torah could have said, the brothers grabbed Yosef and he started begging. He said, please don't do this to me. What's wrong with you? Come on, I'm your brother, right? The Torah doesn't tell you all that. It's 22 years later. The brothers will reminisce, and then you're going to hear that there was a whole other scene here that the Torah omitted. The Torah doesn't tell it to you here. Now, why am I telling you this? Because as human beings, we should be sensitive to it. I don't listen to the news because I don't want to hear about all the vile things that people did. So I don't listen to the media here in Israel. And at certain times, I tell people in shul that their responsibility is not to turn on the news at home. When the Fogel family was murdered in their home on Shabbos, father, mother, children, so I told people, you're cruel if you let your kids hear the news. Why should kids hear such things? Something happened, and it's a terrible thing that happened. I don't know if you know one. But if children have to grow up, my kids heard in school. And for years after they heard, they wouldn't go to sleep without me checking the door, how many locks the door was locked. And I'd have kids who wouldn't sleep next to the door of their room, they'd sleep somewhere else. And there were nights that they wanted me to sleep with them in the room. And all kinds of things that, what does it do to a kid? But it also does things to an adult. So the Torah teaches us a sensitivity here that we should also have. You want to be a sensitive person, you want your kids to be sensitive people. So Yosef gets thrown into the pit, and they go down to have a meal, which is terrible. That means they really saw nothing wrong with what they did. You don't sit down for a meal. There's a halacha that when a court executes someone, they have to fast for the rest of the day. They're not allowed to eat. So they didn't kill him yet. He's still alive. He's naked at the bottom of the pit. That's a fascinating thing. Yosef is the one who will be declothed. Who else in Tanakh is declothed? Yosef gets his clothes taken off now, thrown into the pit naked. Potiphar's wife is going to grab his robe, and he's going to make a decision. Vayazov bigdo biyada. He's going to make a decision. I'm not fighting her over this. I'm leaving. And he runs out and leaves. He's naked. His clothing changed in next week's parsha when he's brought to Paro. A lot of busyness in the Torah with Yosef's clothing or lack thereof. And when Yosef dies, Yosef is the one who's going to be described as Atzmot Yosef, the bones of Yosef. There's the essence, Atzmuto Shel Yosef, that's in our... We will revisit that hopefully next time if you remind me. So we move on. So...
When they threw him in, were the other brothers expecting him to survive the fall? Because I heard him say
yes, for sure. Because
I heard it said last year it was 18 feet down.
Okay.
Well, if he lives, he lives. If he dies, he dies.
But the pasuk says, "Al tishpechu dam," don't murder. Throw him into the pit. And Reuven intended.
He says, don't spill. He says not to spill his blood.
And he says, and the pasuk says his intention was to come back and save him.
Right, but there's 10 other brothers.
But when he says throw them into the pit, he's saying that to save him.
It was that they would survive, but okay.
18 feet is not so logical. He'll survive. He might break his neck. He might. A caravan of Yishmaelim, descendants of Yishmael, are coming from the murderous city of Gilad, and they're carrying all kinds of perfume to sell it in Egypt.
Would you say murderous?
Because the Talmud in Tractate Mako says, "Begilad shchiche rotzchim." In the city of Gilad, there were many murderers. So this caravan of Yishmaelim come, and Yehuda says, "Let's sell Yosef to the Yishmaelim." Well, in the meantime, Midianites show up, and they're merchants. And the Midianites pull Yosef out of the pit. And then the Midianites take this white boy, and they sell him to the Yishmaelim, who are...
The brothers didn't sell Yosef.
Well, what the brothers' role in all of this is a machlokas rishonim. Who actually did the sale? Who found him and sold him? The pasuk says the Midianites came and they pulled him out of the pit and they sold him. So it doesn't say who pulled him out and sold him. And they sold him to the Ishmaelim. So the beginning of the pasuk says Midianites. The end of the pasuk says he was sold to the Ishmaelim. So the simple interpretation is that we find in the book of Shoftim that when Yiftach goes to war, he goes to war against the Midianites. And at the end of the story, the pasuk says they all had half moons on their camels, ki Yishmaelimim, because the Midianites are also Yishmaelim. So you could say it's interchangeable terms, because who was Midian's mother? Hagar, right? So as we find, all of Israel is called Canaan, but there were many nations here, not only Canaan. It's named after the major one. Who are we called? We're called Yehudim, even though we're many tribes, but Yehuda is our central tribe. So very often in Hebrew, we go based on the central one, right? What do they call cell phones here in Israel? So they call them Pelophones, no? Pelephone is one company, but they used to have the biggest share of the market, right? Coming back to here. So who sold Yosef? So it says in the Haftarah, in the book of Amos. It says in the book of Amos that Al Shilosha Pishei Yisrael v'al Arba'lo Ashivenu. There are 3 terrible stains that the Jewish people have, and one of them is Al Michram B'Kesef Tzadik Ve'Evyon Ba'avur Na'alayim. They sold Yosef for sets of shoes. Each of the brothers got themselves a new pair of shoes from the money they sold Yosef for. So in the Haftarah, in this week's Haftarah, it tells us, it would seem, that Yosef was sold by the brothers. So what?
By the brothers.
Correct.
So therefore, when it says the Yishmaelim, must be referring to the Midianites.
Could be. You have a few interpretations you could live with. So Yosef was sold many times. So you have this naked white boy knowing that he's headed for a life of misery. He's headed to a place where he will be bought for his good looks. He will stand out because in Egypt everyone was black and he was white. White in those days meant like Yemenite white, right? More tan, more Sephardi. It didn't probably mean anything like the Ashkenazi Germanic white that we call white today. No. That's not a Jewish color. Our color is a Germanic color. The Jewish color is the Sephardi color. So it would seem. It seems that we are all Germanic, those of us who are whiter, and that's not so Jewish. But okay, we say that. Jews can be of all colors. You can be black, you can be white. When I was a kid, there was a song, we won't talk about it. Yes.
Michael Jackson.
Oh, someone knows. Okay. So so we move on. You can open this. So this one's coffee flavored. So Reuven was hiding out. He was waiting for the night. So when the night comes, he runs back to the pit. Yosef! Nothing. Yosef, I have a rope. Come out. Nothing. Climbs into the pit, and he's not there. So he comes back to the brothers, and he says, the kid's gone. How am I going to see Dad? What am I going to do? I messed up once. Now what? I'm the big brother here. What's going on? So the brothers say, well, we have money for you. Reuven says, what do you mean you have money for me? What do you mean you have money for me? That was our brother. What did you do? So they say, we sold him. So Reuven says, but I told you not to. I told you not to do anything bad to the kid. So they point to you. They say, he had a good idea. He said, why not make money off of this? What's our concern? And he's going to be the continuation of the Jewish people. So let's see his dreams come true now that he's down in Egypt. And this is a rule in life. We blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, the beginning and the end, right? Long blast, and then staccato, right? Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, right? So it says in the Beis Yosef, life begins, Bereshis, there's fluidity, right? Hashem begins creation. And the world begins with Malchius, Hashem is king. The world evolves into Zichronos. The world evolves into what Hashem judges us for. Hashem says, what have you done? Let's take an accounting of the year. That's the staccato. That's dealing with life. That's when things are not going smoothly. And where's the world headed to? The end is another blast, another straight. We said Malchios, Zichronos, that's our actions, and Shofaros, the final blasts of Mashiach. So you're on the train, and the train is going somewhere. Now the question is, what are you going to do during your time on that train? You cannot get off the train. The world is headed a certain way. There are elements of the world where you do not have Bechira. You will not change them. There's a godly plan which you can't change. And when you try to change it, Hashem says, I'm the boss. So when the Egyptians say, let me wipe out the Jews, Hashem says, I'll show you. It won't work. When the brothers say, we're going to wipe out Yosef, Hashem says, I'll show you. Your very actions are going to propel him to the fulfillment of his own dream. And so one of the most important rules in Torah philosophy is that you don't know God's plan. And just because you think that right now you're the lowest of the low, you have no future, remember, on Rosh Hashanah, Yosef's life changed in 1 minute. Yosef is now going to be in shackles. The pasuk says in Tehillim, Ina vakevel raglo. Yosef is going to be in shackles. Yosef is going to have the hardest job. You know what the hardest job in the army is? I bet you don't know. The hardest job in the army is the chef.
Why should you thinking that?
I'm serious, I'm not joking.
No, I'm not either.
The chef stands in a hot kitchen. You know, people who got a mission, so they have their missions, and then they have life. The chef doesn't have a life. Every minute he's under pressure, and he's sitting and steaming over steaming hot pots. It doesn't matter summer, winter, it's never comfortable, and it's a lot of pressure, and it's not fun. Sometimes it smells good, and sometimes it smells bad, and sometimes it's dealing with stinky and filthy stuff. He's getting dirty. It's not a good life. That's Yosef's life, right? It says he stood over the dude. He stood over pots, cooking, in the heat, sweltering, with shackles on his feet. That's Yosef. Ina, he was tortured. That's the pasuk in Tehillim.
Why is that marked down?
Tehillim. It's a pasuk in
Why
Tehillim.
do we know that from Psukim though?
You don't. David HaMelech revealed it to you. We move on. So Yosef is taken down in a caravan naked. And our sages say, but it was good. Ordinarily the Yishmaelim, take hides. Hashem wanted to take good care of Yosef, so this time they were carrying perfume. Explain that one to me. He's being taken to be violated repeatedly. That's why this good-looking boy is going to be sold in Egypt. And that's in fact almost what's going to happen, as we'll see in a moment. He's sitting there, his brothers turned on him, and he doesn't really know what his father's stance on the whole story is. His father sent him here. What does his father think? His father on his side or the brother's side? The world is finished. He has nothing to hope for, right? No one knows he's here. His father's going to think he's dead, right? Yosef knows they slaughtered that goat, even though the pasuk records it later. Yosef knows his father's going to think he's dead. His brothers want him dead. And now, what's going to happen with his life? And Yosef is sitting there, and there's the smell of perfume. And our sages say, I just wanted to show you I'm with you, Yosef. He's sitting naked. So the idea, Rav Moshe Feinstein explains, is that when things go bad, we tend to think that everything's bad. And sometimes, even when everything is bad, the Ribbon Shel Olam sends us little twinkles of light, where if you notice them, it's the Ribbon Shel Olam saying, don't think I've left you. It's bad, and I'm following what's going on, and I'm with you even though it's very, very bad. And Yosef caught that. When Yosef sat there and smelt the perfume, Yosef said, Ribbon Shel Olam, thank you for looking out for me. I know I know it should have been a stinky journey. I got to tell you that every time I drive, and there's a garbage truck in front of me, and I smell all his foul smell, or I'm on a bus and there's a foul smell or whatever, I say, okay, the Rebbeinu Shalom's not telling me I'm with you on this one, right? Now, I'm not saying that the message is I'm against you. I'm just saying when you smell the good smell, remember, it didn't have to smell that way. Yosef, as bad as everything was, Yosef says, thanks, Rebbeinu Shalom, I understand. You're showing me it could still be worse, and on that point, you made it better. Now, when a person is ready to look at life that way, then a person has the most important reminder throughout life that Hashem is still with me. The most fundamental point that every Jew has to know is that you're not alone. Hashem has never turned on anyone. Even when the heavenly voice came out and said, I'm waiting for everyone to come back except for Acher, the Rebbeinu Shalom was waiting for Acher to say, but I do want. Even if you don't want, I want. That was the greatness of King Saul. The Rebbeinu Shalom said, I'm here by your enemy. How do you live in a world where God says, I'm your enemy? That's the tzidkus of Shaul HaMelech. So we move on. So Yosef is being taken down to be sold into this vile circumstance, and his brothers tear the garment and send it back to Yaakov with a most vicious statement. Hakerno, can you please recognize? Haketonet bin Chayim lo, is it your son's garment or not? And he recognizes it. So Hashem will repay Yehuda. The continuation of the story, the Torah will fast forward now. The Torah goes out of order to show you how Yehuda got punished for what he did. He buries one son, He buries another son, Onan. He has a horrible life, Yehuda. This isn't fun what's about to happen. The brothers look at Yehuda and they say, it was your idea. If you would have told us to take Yosef back, we would have done it. So Yehuda gets punished right afterwards. But first, Yaakov says, Chaya ra'a achalatu. Turns to the brothers and he says, an evil animal destroyed my son Yosef, looking each of them in the eye and saying, Yehuda, you are Yehuda, Aryeh, Dan is Gur Aryeh, Binyamin is Ze'ev Yitraf. Okay, Binyamin wasn't there. Every one of you is compared to an animal. And I suspect a wild animal, an evil animal ate my son, and he lets them know that they're all suspect. And that's why later on in next week's parsha, when they're going to want to take Binyamin down to Egypt, he's going to say, I can't trust you. The last time I sent a brother to you, he got dead somehow. So he's alluding to them. Yosef was destroyed, and I don't know by who. Now, Yaakov tears his clothing, and he starts mourning. So the brothers wait. Our laws of mourning. You mourn 7 days, you move on. You're not allowed to mourn more than that. But Yaakov Avinu tells them, you don't understand. Hashem made a pact with me, and he said, you will have 12 children, and they represent the 12 forces of the zodiac. There's a 13th child, somehow is going to come to the world. I'm not going to talk to you about that. That's because there's a 13th month of Adar. There's a 13th power we're not going to talk about right now. But the future of the Jewish people. When I left my father's house, I went to sleep on the very altar that my father Yitzchak was offered on. And I took that altar and I put it by my head. And Hashem made all those 12 stones that were used by Avram to make the very altar which Adam Arishon made, which was used by Avram Avinu for Yitzchak. And then I took that and it all became one. And the Rebbeinu Shalom said to me, you should know, if you have one, if you have all 12 children, then you are the future of the Jewish people. If you lose one, then there's no Jewish people. There's no possibility of us continuing with our mission in this world now that Yosef is gone. I don't know what Hashem has in mind, but we just lost everything. And that's why Yaakov spends the next 22 years mourning. Because from Yaakov's perspective, there was no filling in the gap for Yosef. Not because of Yosef, but because Hashem had told him that the future of the Jewish people lay in this. There was a pact. The continuation of the world was contingent on there being 12. Now, everyone tries to comfort him, and he refuses. He says, I'm going to mourn to the death. And Yitzchak, who sees him mourning, is more devastated, because what did we say? Rachamei ha'av al beno. So Yitzchak mourns over Yaakov, and Yitzchak knows what happened.
Even though Yitzchak's dead?
He's not dead.
Yitzchak?
The Torah recorded his passing early. He's alive at this story. Do the math. So Yitzchak knows that Yosef is alive. And he knows that his son Yaakov is crying for nothing. But he also knows, what?
How does he know?
Thank you.
He's a cow.
The easy answer is that Ruach HaKodesh.
Okay, we don't have to.
But you don't know what Ruach HaKodesh is.
I don't want to derail the whole.
Right. So do me a favor. Next time, bring us back to this, and we have to understand what Ruach HaKodesh is, what the answer is. So Yitzchak says, if Hashem's not revealing it to Yaakov, I'm not supposed to interfere. If Hashem revealed it to me, but not to him, so I don't know what Hashem's thinking, but I'm not supposed to interfere. So he mourns Yaakov. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. And I don't know if you're going to be able to hold on to this question for the rest of your life, but I wish you would. I'm going to ask you a question. What did Yaakov Avinu gain from being sad? Nothing. He only lost from it. And you should remember this for life. Mourning is part of life. We have losses, we have to mourn. It's a part of life. There are laws of mourning. It's a psychological process that has to happen. But sadness does not have to be a part of life. Oh, when a person mourns, they're sad. But Yaakov went on from that. And the difference between what Yehuda is going to do and what Yosef's going to do and what Yaakov does is that Yaakov loses 22 years of productivity. Sadness stops your ability to produce. I had a friend whose family made Aliyah. They came to Israel, and their eldest son, my friend was Naphtali, had an older brother, Elazar. Elazar walked off of a bus. The bus did not stop at the side of the road. Once upon a time, things were not so organized in this country, believe it or not. And the driver stops and lets him off. And there's a lane next to him. And a van passes right when he gets off the bus, and its mirror hit Elazar on the back of the head, and Elazar went into a coma for 3 days, I think, and then he died. And the family packed their bags and went back to the United States. And the father went into a depression that he never pulled out of till the day he died. I don't know if he blamed himself for the son's passing or what. Now, I'm not coming to judge a person. We never know, what a person goes through. But I'm going to tell you an incredible pshat I heard from Rabbi Goodman, and I don't remember who he heard it from. When Yaakov is going to visit Pharaoh is going to look at all the creases in his face and all his white hairs, and he's going to say, Kamaya meishenei chayecha? Old man, how old are you? You look incredibly old. I saw Avraham, I saw Yitzchak, I saw your grandparents. You must be much older than all of them, but it doesn't match the years. I was a kid in the court when your father came here, and he looked like you, but you look much older. And what does Yaakov say? No, I'm not so old. But I've had a hard life. And that's why I look this way. And our sages say, for every word that Yaakov said in that pasuk, he lost a year from his life. And our sages do the math, and they say the number of years that Yaakov lived less than his father Yitzchak was the number of words he said in that pasuk. For every word he said about his hard life, he lost a year of his life. So the question is, but wait, he said the truth. So Rabbi Goodman quoted the following pshat. He said, in Shamayim they said, Yaakov Avinu, you had challenges, but they should not have affected you that way. You shouldn't have looked that old. The fact that he looked old is what we're seeing in this week's parasha. Now, I can't talk about Yaakov Avinu. You know, Yaakov Avinu had Dinah violated. We don't know what that does to a person. According to one opinion in Chazal, she never got married after that. Dinah had a daughter, and all his sons said, we're going to kill her. So what does Yaakov do? He travels down to Egypt. He takes this little girl. He gives her a locket with the whole story. I want you to know you're my daughter. I want you to know you're a Jew. And he goes to the most pious woman he can find in Egypt, the wife of Potiphar, and he says, I want you, now they're a noble family. She's supposed to be okay. And her husband's a eunuch, so he's not going to do something wrong with the girl. And they bring her up to be one of the biggest tzaddikus in Jewish history, right? Osnas, the girl that Yosef will marry in next week's parasha, is in fact the girl that Dinah had from Shechem. When Yaakov Avinu sees that the brothers are ready to kill her, they say, what, Shechem's daughter is going to grow up in our house? Yaakov says, you have no right to kill her. She's Dinah's daughter. You can't kill her. And he says to Dinah, look, I can't protect her. They're capable of doing things behind my back. Look, they just killed all Shechem behind my back. So Yaakov takes the little girl and takes her down and gives her to an adoptive family. What does that do to a grandfather? He can't trust his own kids not to kill his own granddaughter? Can you imagine what that means? I can't imagine what that means. I can't imagine what it means that kids answer their father, so we're taking the law into our own hands. We just killed out a whole city. What does that do to a person? He just thinks his own kids murdered his favorite son, right? So I can't say what it means, but I can say the lesson to us. There's a lesson here that from Shamayim they said you are not supposed to take it that way. That means life will throw challenges at you, and you're supposed to look like life's hunky-dory. You're supposed to be able to take it and care, but not let it affect you so much in the sense you have to be able to see things from a higher perspective. Hashem's running the world. I'm in good hands. You know, I was dating, and they didn't offer me good shidduchim. It was like really bad, right? I once went out with a girl. She was on the side. I was walking. She was on the sidewalk. I was on the street, and she says to me, "Listen here. You look like a shrimp next to me without me being on the sidewalk. Why don't you come up on the sidewalk?" Right? All kinds of wonderful lines. So every time someone would set me up, I'd always say, you know, if it didn't work out, I'd come back to say thank you. And they'd say, oh, is it going well? And I'd say, no, it's over. And they said, so what'd you come to say thank you for? I said, what do you mean? You got me married. You did the best you could so I should get married. You did your shtadlus. The Rebbe Shalom is the one who's going to decide how it's going to work out. And I'm in the best hands in the world.
So I have a question.
He's waiting first, sorry. Yeah.
I'm wondering if I'm looking at something backwards then. Yosef had to end up in Egypt, because as you said, he basically saved. There was so much history that had to happen with him being there. Was Yehuda punished for what he did to Yosef, or was he primarily punished for what he did to Yaakov?
Both. As we will see going forward.
50-50?
I don't know. That I don't know. Yes.
If Yaakov was able to see the daughter of Dinah and say, look, I can't protect her, let me at least send her somewhere that can, why couldn't he do the same as Yosef and his brothers?
In hindsight, he probably ate his heart out thinking that he should have, right? We'll get to that if one day we will merit to learn Parshas Vayigash together. So Yehuda is demoted. His brothers say, you're not our leader after what you did. So Yehuda goes and he develops business. And Chazal tell us a very important lesson, continuing the idea we just said. Yosef was stuck in Egypt. Yaakov was stuck mourning. The brothers were like in disarray. What are we going to do now? Yehuda was creating Mashiach. The hallmark of a leader is that he, in every situation, he says, and what am I supposed to do now? Meaning, life is always going to give you challenges. And the reason that Yehuda is the founder of the kingship and Mashiach and the future of the Jewish people is because he keeps popping to the top. He does not let the challenges of life knock the wind out of him. And everything that's going to happen now is going to seem bad, but at the end of the whole story, Mashiach and David HaMelech is going to come out of the story. And that's the hallmark of Yehuda. And that's something that every one of us has to learn from Yehuda. Meaning, Chazal say that ever since Hashem ended creation, Hashem is busy doing one thing, not what you think. Says the Medrash in the beginning of Parshas Matos. Ever since Hashem finished creating the world, Hashem is busy creating ladders. That's what the Medrash says. What does it mean, ladders? You will have constant opportunities in life to go up and down. Hashem is constantly offering you a ladder. You played Chutes and Ladders, but Hashem's ladders are ladders that you can climb up and ladders that you can go down on. Meaning, Hashem is constantly creating, altering, orchestrating in our lives opportunities. Opportunities for growth and opportunities to grow down. But you have to remember, it's like the game of Chutes and Ladders. The ladder that's on this square, that's at this time, that's in this juncture of your life, is here now. Don't think you're going to have it in 5 years or in 2 years. There are different ladders. You have to know there are always ladders. Every opportunity in life, every situation in life is giving you an opportunity for a ladder. The question is, are you going to notice it? Yosef's going to shoot to the top. Yehuda's going to shoot to the top. That's the hallmark of a leader. There's a wonderful book which I don't recommend you read. It's called Inflection Points. The CEO of Intel writes over there about how the business was destroyed. And it was from that moment, he calls them inflection points, that he was able to make it the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is. But they were destroyed. They were at a point where people were breaking contracts with them. Everyone looked at them as the lousiest company in the market. They were behind. The Japanese had developed secretly processors that were much quicker than anything that Intel had ever created. And it looked like it was over. And he says that every CEO that's successful is going to face situations like that. And when you take those situations and you capitalize on them and you figure out, how do I make this work? That's where your greatest successes come out of. But you have to not let the wind be knocked out of you. And you have to be able to look at life the way Yehuda and Yosef do, which we will get to in a moment. When we get to Yosef, we'll discuss what's Yosef's secret. And the person, the guy who figured this out, it's interesting, Chazal tell it to us. Chazal said in the Medrash Rabbah 2,000 years ago, but there's a guy who wrote about it 20 years ago. His name is Stephen Covey. None of you heard of Stephen Covey. Good for you. The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, Stephen Covey, right? So in his book, he zooms in on Yosef HaTzadik. But what he says is a Medrash Rabbah. He just got it right. The Medrash says it. We'll get to it shortly. So Yehuda forms a partnership with a Kanani. The word Canaan means, wait. Canaan be'adom mozenei mirmala ashok ahev. The word Canaan means a merchant, because merchants used to have scales. So the word Canaan really means a weight, a scale. I don't even know if we're recording here. Oh, we are, good. Okay, so Yehuda marries a non-Jewish woman, as did all the other tribes, which is interesting. Well, they converted them, don't get me wrong. They converted them. But as careful as Avraham Avinu was not to marry a Canaanite girl, his grandchildren were not careful about it. Good question. We don't have time tonight to go into it. So he has a first child, and he names him Er. He has a second child. She names him Onan. Onan has a twin younger brother. His name is Shelah. And Yehuda marries off his first son. His first son was a super genius, Er. And at the age of 7 or 8, he marries him off. So he takes a very old, pious woman named Tamar. Look, this was a family of geniuses. If Avraham Avinu could give public speeches that the local king felt threatened by at the age of 3. So you understand that there's genius blood going on here. Saying, where do you find the 3-year-old who could sway the masses against Nimrod, who's an experienced orator and king? Not I said this. The Meir in his introduction to Pirkei Avos writes this about Avraham Avinu. So you have a family of geniuses. You guys know the story that Avraham at age 3, right? Right? A 3-year-old is a challenge to a king. Think about that. What does that mean? Either the king isn't very smart or the kid is very smart. So the king was smart. Nimrod was a very smart person. Yeah. So Yehuda goes to get his son a wonderful wife, this lady Tamar, who just lost her father, Shem, right? You've heard of Shem, right? So she's not such a youngster, Tamar. And Er marries her. She's been waiting all these years to get into Avraham Avinu's family. And maybe Shem had a daughter in his old age, so maybe she was in her 30s or 40s, but she's marrying an 8-year-old, a 7-year-old, right? Er is very young at this juncture. And but Er is a genius. Er is brilliant, right? He has the intellect of a person above age 20, because until you have the intellect of a 20-year-old, God doesn't judge you in the heavenly court. And if Er is going to get Misa B'dei Shemayim, if Hashem is going to kill him for his misbehavior, that means that Er, the pasuk tells you, Vayamit Hashem. That means it was Misa B'dei Shemayim. That means that Er, at the age of 7, had the intellect of a 20-year-old plus. So Er marries Tamar, and he says, she's gorgeous, and she's held on to her beauty all these years. Why is she held on to her beauty? Because she hasn't had kids. I don't want to have kids. If I have kids, she'll stop being so beautiful. So every time Er is intimate with his wife, when it comes time to emit his seed, he throws it to the floor. And this is the way Er is with his wife.
At the age of 7, you can do that?
So the Talmud says that something changed. The Talmud says that in the days of Tanakh, kids could get pregnant and impregnate at a much younger age. We find that Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, was all 7 years old. She gave birth to a child, right? So the Talmud says, how does that work? How does a 7-year-old give birth? That doesn't work. The Talmud says things change. Now, I can tell you that even now things are changing. They're saying that it's because kids are eating so much soy, but girls are developing at a much younger age now. Girls are developing, maturing. There are girls, they say that if a girl will eat a lot of soy, then at age 8 or 9, she can be developed as a young lady. And that's just, in one generation, they're seeing huge differences. They're telling parents now that if you see your kids developing early, then make sure to reduce the amount of soy they're eating.
Isn't the hormones in the food?
Maybe, I don't know. I don't know what it is about soy that's doing it.
There's also when the societies have been more stressed, the children can also develop earlier. Presumably, it's a biologic reaction that if all the adults are dying off, you need more people who are stepping up to adults.
I hear. So we know in Vietnam, this is researched, you could look up the term male lactation, that the male prisoners were able to nurse, 30 to 50% of them. Under starvation, our body reacts. The hormones shift. Look it up, male lactation, you'll see. So I'm saying, the idea could be, I don't know. So the Talmud says that things changed. I don't know. The Talmud says that in those days, kids could get pregnant younger. Again, the Talmud's talking about King David's time, but this is whatever.
Even before that.
Onan says, if I have kids, they're all going to actually be called my brother's kids, because doing Yibum, that's the idea, that you bring kids to the world, that they're really your brother's kids.
I looked up the youngest one, that there's modern documented cases. There was a woman who was 5 years, 7 months, and 21 days when she gave birth.
Okay.
Which, if you do the math, means she probably wasn't yet 5 when...
Fine. So he answered you. At any rate, Onan does the same thing, and so he dies too. And Yehuda starts thinking, well, the only common denominator between my 2 kids is their wife. And it must be that something's going on there that's not kosher. So he tells her, look, You married my son at 7. You married my son who's 6 or 8 and 7. This one's still a year younger. We got to give him some time. So Tamar says, fine. She goes back to Shem's house, right? Her father, Shem Malkitzedek, and she waits. Now, Yehuda then loses his wife. So Chazal tell us, "Amatchil b'mitzvah ve'ino gomra." If a person starts a mitzvah, Yehuda started the mitzvah of saving Yosef, but he never finished the job. So Chazal say that's why he buried his wife and his 2 children. Right? When I give someone a tramp, so they sometimes say, you could drop me off here. I say, where do you want to go? They say, well, drop me off here. I said, why don't I take you to your house? They say, it's only another minute. I say, right. But Chazal say, if you start a mitzvah and don't finish it, it's not such a good thing, right? Chazal say, Yehuda started the mitzvah of Sem Yosef, he didn't finish the job. Chazal, okay, that's part 1. So when we say, you asked me, was it a punishment for Yosef? Part 1, Chazal say yes. We'll get to part 2 in a second. So,
how is it saving Yosef?
well, they wanted to kill him, and he at least had him sold, so he's still alive. But he could have, by the same token, said, guys, it's a bad idea, let's bring him home. So he started the mitzvah, he got them not to kill him, but he didn't finish the mitzvah. So
he could have just left him there and then waited for Reuven.
But he didn't know what Reuven's plan was. So after Yehuda finishes his time of mourning over his wife, so he heads up north to shear his sheep. Now, Hashem makes sure that Tamar gets word that this is happening. And the Rambam begins the laws of marriage with a very interesting introduction that we don't have in other places in the Rambam. Ordinarily, Rambam is here to tell us halacha. This is how you're supposed to run your life. These are the laws. These are the mitzvahs. This is why. This is what you do. When it comes to the laws of marriage, suddenly the Rambam becomes a historian. Kodem matan Torah. Before the Torah was given. So, again, we don't have this in other places. Here, the Rambam writes, before the Torah was given, a man would win a woman in the marketplace. And if he and she wanted, they'd go off together and live together. If they want to be married, they'd be married. If not, they went on with their life. This was
usually how it works nowadays, more or less, in the Western civilization. Stuff hasn't changed much.
okay.
Well, it changed from the market to the club, but,
Yeah.
So Tamar gets dressed up and she sits at the crossroads where Yehuda's supposed to pass by. Now, Tamar has been waiting her whole life to become a part of Yehuda, to become a part of Yaakov Avinu's family. This is what she wanted her whole life. There was nothing else she wanted. Anyone else who wanted to marry her, she was the world's biggest beauty, but she wasn't interested. She was waiting for one thing. And when she marries Er, so he's not interested in having kids. And when she marries Onan, he's not interested in having kids. And she wasn't interested in anything but being part of the Jewish people. So we learned from Tamar what perseverance means. When you have your eye on doing what's right, you go for it. And so Tamar gets all dressed up. And because her whole life, she was such a modest woman, so that even when they'd go for a meal in Yehuda's house, think about the Arab women all veiled up, right? Well, that's how she was. Yehuda had no idea what she looked like. Yehuda never saw her. She was the epitome of modesty. The only one who knew what she looked like were her husbands, right? Yehuda didn't know. When she'd come to Yehuda's house, she didn't take it easy. I'm in my father-in-law's house. I'll sprawl out on the couch. No, she was the epitome of modesty there too. So comes the time that she wants to get Yehuda. He doesn't know it's her. So she gets herself dressed up. She has a nice veil. She gets dressed up as a woman of ill repute. And Yehuda sees her. Now, we have a few different routes the Gemara goes in explaining the story. But let's begin with the Rambam. So you have a time in world history where the norms are that you can make up with a woman that you're going to be with her. So Yehuda says to her,
here somewhere if you want to.
Huh?
I think I have the Rambam here somewhere.
Right.
Look it up.
Just debating which midrashim to bring. That's all. That's my debate.
Okay.
So let's start with an introduction. Chacham Ovadia Yosef brought the following story. There was a king who was he was friendly with the rabbi, and he said to the rabbi, "Look, you guys, you interpret the Torah in ways that I don't get." So he says, "What do you mean?" So he says, "There's a pasuk. It says, Vayavo Esav min hasadeh v'uayef." Esav came from the field, he was tired. What do you guys say? You say, Sadeh. Oh, he found the girl and violated her in the field. Because it says in another place that Tzaka Nara Murasa, right? Sadeh. Huayef, Ayefa nafshi lo orgim. He just committed murder. You throw the book at Esav. You're telling me so many different things he did that day. You say he denied Hashem's existence. He denied the world to come. So many things you say. What does it say? The poor guy came in hungry and he saw good food and he said, "Can I have some?" And his brother said, "Sell me your rights and then I'll give you food." And you throw the book at him. So the rabbi said, "I'll get back to you, okay? Let's continue the meal." Fine. They reach the end of the meal and suddenly a servant comes in and whispers something to the king's ear. The king turns bright red, and he looks around, and he looks for the servant that was serving the meal, and he says, "Bring him here." So they bring him the servant, and he says, "Where's the knife?" So the servant goes, "Master, I don't know. So he says, "The rabbi's here. And we took out the dishes that you know are solid gold. And you thought that they're not going to count in the kitchen how many dishes come back. Well, they did. And give us back the knife." And the servant says, "Master, I didn't take the knife. I didn't touch it. I promise." He says, "Liar. It was me, the rabbi, and you." He says, "Bring out the whips." They come out. They bring out these big fat whips. They take off it. "What do you mean? We sat here for a meal. In your honor, I took out the most expensive cutlery I have. This is cutlery that's part of the royal, whatever it's called, heirloom. But every piece over there is worth a mint. Now they counted it in the kitchen, and they're missing a knife. It didn't get lost anywhere. It was only me, you, and him. Obviously, he stole it." So the rabbi says, "Really?" And he pulls out the knife, and he says, "Here you go, Your Majesty." So the king goes, "Oh?" So he says, "You see, you asked me a question in the beginning of the meal. You said, why did the rabbis throw the book at Esav? And now I'll ask you a question. Why did he throw the book at the servant? Because what were your thoughts? You said, I know him, and I know you, and you wouldn't do anything wrong. And if something went wrong, I'm sure he did a lot of other things wrong that I didn't catch him on, right?" So he said, "You see, you look at things, and Chazal also knew how to look at things. Chazal knew who Esav was, Chazal knew who Esav became, Chazal knew a lot about Esav. So when it bothers you that why did Chazal say a lot of things, you have to know that they knew where they were coming from. Now, there's more to the story, but that's not my point. My point is, when you approach a story in Tanakh, so you can approach a story and say, I don't know what it says here. It says here Yehuda saw a good-looking girl. He thought he was a woman of ill repute, and he did what many scoundrels would do. So I know what happened in the story. So, okay, you can go to sleep. You read the story. You have your opinion, and good luck. Have a good life. But you have to remember that Chazal were probably the most honest people that you could find. And the more you study Talmud and Medrash, the more you'll see how Chazal weren't hesitant to throw the book at people. You read the story of Bathsheba, and you read one story. Chazal read the story of Bathsheba, and they tell you a completely different story. Suddenly you hear she's a 7-year-old. Doesn't that make your blood boil? But Chazal didn't mind telling you that. Rebbe tells you, you're wrong if you think King David sinned. And along comes the Talmud and says, Rebbe, you were biased. You're a descendant of King David. The Talmud didn't care to mince words. When someone was wrong, the Talmud threw the book at them. When someone did something that the text sounds like they were right, and the Talmud knew that they were wrong, so the Talmud says, let me tell you what really happened there. And it goes both ways. And the Talmud doesn't tell you they're saints. Even when it says about Yishai, that met bet Yoshen Nahash, so our sages say, no, he wasn't perfect. It just means he never did something that was worthy of dying for. So the Talmud says, what does the pasuk say? En tzaddik ba'aretz asher yaseto velo yachta. No one's perfect. There's no one who can say, I've never done anything wrong. No such thing. The Talmud, the pasuk tells you that. So Chazal weren't out to encourage us to look at Yehuda and say, what a perfect guy. No, on the contrary. Chazal will tell us things that he did wrong that you wouldn't have seen in the text. Chazal will go both ways, about Moshe Rabbeinu, about Amram, about how many things did Chazal say? Nadav and Avihu. What does the pasuk say? They brought a foreign flame. What do our sages say? They were thinking to themselves, I wonder when Moshe and Aaron will die and we could lead these people. It doesn't say that in the pasuk. On the contrary, it says that they were the most righteous Jews of that time. And yet, Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's two sons. Chazal weren't hesitant to come and tell you what you didn't see about what Nadav and Avihu did wrong, and what Aaron HaKohen did wrong, and what Moshe Rabbeinu did wrong, and what Yehuda did wrong. When you read the pasuk that the cloak was sent to Yaakov, and he was told, Haker na, can you please recognize this? So you read that, didn't say who. Along come Chazal and say it was Yehuda who did that. And that's why Yehuda in a few psukim will be shown his own garment and be told, Haker no, could you please recognize this? The same words, behaker, biser, with the word haker no. He gave the news to his father, behaker bisiru. So with the word haker, he was also told, hey, whose is this? Right? So when you read Chazal, so you have to know that Chazal were incredibly honest. Incredibly honest. Like Chazal told you when Chazal themselves said something that wasn't true. The Gemara tells you, so-and-so said this, and it's not true. He was embarrassed to tell the truth, and here's the truth. Chazal were outright, and it didn't matter if it was Rabbi Yeshua, if it was Rabbi Eliezer, if it was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says Bar Kochva was Mashiach. They could have covered that up, but no. Chazal say Rabbi Akiva thought Bar Kochva was Mashiach, and he was wrong. Chazal didn't hide that from you. Chazal didn't hide a lot of things that were wrong. At the end of Tractate Kiddushin, the Talmud tells you about different rabbis who made mistakes. Like a rabbi came home and his wife got all dressed up and he didn't recognize her. So he asked her, who are you? And she said, don't you know me? I'm the woman of ill repute. Everyone knows me. So he said, so I'm glad you came. And they went to the bedroom and did what they did. And afterwards, he felt very bad. And then his wife got back to her regular clothing, and she came back home. And he went to the oven, and she asked him, what are you doing there? And he said, because I should be burnt. So she said, why? And he said, because I did something very wrong while you were away. She says, really, what'd you do? So he tells her, well, the woman of ill repute in the town showed up and seduced me, and I gave in. I did what I shouldn't have done. So she said, I fooled you, it was me. So he looks at her, his old wife, and he says, nah, I don't think so. And she says, let me tell you exactly what happened. I'll tell you parts of the story you didn't tell me. And she reveals to him that she got dressed up and she fooled him. The Talmud told you that story. The Talmud didn't have to tell you that, right? You wouldn't have been missing anything from your Shas if that story wouldn't have been written there. But the Talmud was honest. The Talmud wasn't about playing games. The Talmud was about telling you the truth. So when the story of Yehuda shows up, the Talmud also has a few things to say. The Talmud tells you Yehuda moved on. He saw her, and he wasn't interested, and he moved on. And the Ribono Shel Olam sent an angel that said, get back there. And Yehuda wasn't interested. And then it says that he was overcome with feelings that shouldn't have naturally happened to him. and their Bonshom made it that you read parts of Torah and it says Hashem hardened Paro's heart. So here the oral law tells you that Yehuda was overcome. However you want to read it. Again, you have the Rambam that says it was the norm of that time that was within reason. At the end of the day, Yehuda's pretty embarrassed, right? He calls his non-Jewish friend and says, you go pay her off, okay? And obviously for his non-Jewish friend, that wasn't an embarrassment, right? He felt fine with that. It was okay to tell all the neighbors, I'm looking for the woman of ill repute around here. He had no problem with that. You see, he did it, right? In the end, Yehuda says, I think we should give up on the search because in the end, it's going to come back to haunt us, right? So Yehuda goes and he's with her. And again, if you want to go the Rambam route, that in those days, this was part of the accepted way of life. You want to go the Chazal say that there was a whole long conversation with her. Chazal say that when she invited him, he said, I don't go with a woman that I don't know if she's clean. And she said, I kept my 7 days of purity. I know your customs. He says, in our family, we go to mikveh before people are intimate. She said, I'll tell you the laws of mikveh. I went with it. I'm not coming to you unprepared. And she had answers for all of his questions. And then they went and did what they did. But there's a very important chidah. Rav Chaim Yosef David Azulai, a super genius who wrote about 40 books. So he quotes the following concept. He says, every time Hashem wants to bring something enormous to the world, every time Mashiach has to come closer to the world, Hashem brings him to the world through something that on the outside looks vile. So Lot sleeps with a daughter, and from that comes Moab, from which will come Rus, from which will come David HaMelech. David HaMelech has to come from Ruth, the Moabite, and the whole Moabite people come from who? From Lot sleeping with one of his daughters, because they think the world's destroyed, right? And Lot's drunk, so he can't tell them they're wrong, right? And they're from Sodom. And where is David HaMelech going to be born from? From Peretz, who is born from Yehuda, thinking he's with a woman of ill repute. And in the end of the day, meaning every step of the way that's supposed to have a tremendous leap forward, so it's as though Hashem repeatedly shows us how from the darkest things can come the greatest light. Don't think that something's dark. And that's the idea, by the way, in my humble opinion, of the story of Osnas. We're about to meet this young lady who was the daughter of Shechem, the man who violated Dinah. And she's going to have 2 children with Yosef, Menashe and Ephraim. We said there's a secret 13th tribe that's going to come to the world. It's Menashe and Ephraim, right? Yosef's going to have 2 children. He's going to count like 2 tribes. We said there's a 13th month. When Amalek comes to battle the Jewish people, they have it down pat. They know the mazel of every Jew. The only person who fights Amalek in Moshe Rabbeinu's wars are those that are born in Adar Beis. Those that are born in that extra month, they don't have a mazel. They are unique Jews. A Jew that's born in Adar Beis has powers that no one else has.
What about Adar Aleph Lamed?
I don't know. Don't you there? So
It's not technically Adar Aleph.
Luck.
3 interpretations.
Just a quick
one. Okay? So our sages say that the zodiac affects us. The zodiac of the moment of conception, of intimacy, of ejaculation, and the zodiac of the moment of being birthed, and the zodiac of every minute you're living. Each one, the greatest impact is from the beginning. And then the moment of being born. And then every minute has certain impacts from what's going on there. That concept is what people usually refer to when they say mazel, ring that he would salis.
Isn't that what Alfred's when he told
His ring, right, that they would sign
It's a
things with,
signet ring, yeah.
right?
People had them.
And
When did he have one?
very special Yehuda staff, which one day maybe we will still talk about. So Yehuda goes his way, she goes her way, and lo and behold, from one time being together, they're pregnant. And she's pregnant with twins, and she goes back home, and she gets back into her regular dark clothing that widows used to wear in those days. And Yehuda can't find her. He doesn't know who she is. And after she's pregnant, so she's been with someone else. So Yehuda says, by our law here, by the Noahide laws of Canaan, so she has to be burnt, which is one of two interpretations. The Talmud says they built this big bonfire and they were going to toss her in. That's the Talmud's interpretation, that was the Noahide law of the time in Canaan. The Ramban and other Rishonim say that when women were understood to be women of ill repute, they were branded. They used to, like you brand cattle, they would have a sign on it was meaning when people did it, so the society had to outlaw it. So if you knew that if you got caught doing this, then you'd have to walk around and everyone would know that this is how you got caught. You'd have this brand on your forehead. That was a social institution of the Canaanites of that time in that locale. So whether tisaref literally means gets burnt or not, so she was taken by the courts, the Canaanite courts, the Noahide courts of the time, to be burnt. And she sends her father-in-law the following message. You want to know who I'm pregnant to? The person who owns these, can you please recognize, haker no, same wording he used, can you please recognize whose these are? Because this is the man that impregnated me. Now, what's she saying? I did by the law. The law was that I'm supposed to either marry you or marry your son. So I did. Now, she went to the closet where she knew she had left Yehuda's ring and staff and talis, and it's not there. It's gone. And so the officers are waiting by the door, and they say, "Lady, we're going to go." And she starts thinking, "Why don't I just tell them? I did nothing wrong. What I did is by the law and by the book, and he's the father, and I could prove it to him. I'll tell him the story." But she says, "You know what? I'm going to embarrass him publicly. And if I embarrass him publicly, you don't get to the right place by doing the wrong things." We often think, it's okay, I have a good reason. God, you and I, we both understand. It's okay, right? We have that thought process. And Chazal say that Tamar taught us a rule that even for Noachites, a person should rather be burnt, she and her two children, right? She's pregnant. She doesn't know it's two, it's one, as far as she knows, right? She says, but I can't do that to him. I cannot embarrass him publicly. I'm not going to do that. Meaning, there are things I do. I'm not going to do that. And that's in the books. And after she makes that decision, I'm not going to embarrass him publicly, she goes on to search, and suddenly it appears. It's there. She didn't see it, but it was there. In the wording of the Talmud, along came Esav's angel and took away all of them, and along came Gabriel, Am Yisrael's angel, and put them back. Did Chazal mean literally the angels walked into the room and hid it and brought it back? Or was that Chazal's way of saying, you should know that there are forces at play in your life, and then the negative forces did not want this to happen. So initially she thought she wasn't seeing it, and then she did find it. However you want to interpret it. But when Yehuda sees it, he says, she's right, I'm the father. And Yehuda marries her from that day onward, and she gives birth to twins, one of which is Peretz, who is going to be the father of all of the Jewish kings. And here Chazal say that until this moment, Reuven did not have the courage to stand up and say, Dad, I'm the one that did what messed around with your beds with Bilhah. It was when Yehuda got up and said, I did it. I'm the one that's wrong. And he said, I have to honor the Ribbon Shel more than my own honor. I'm going to admit it. And this way she will be saved. So Reuven said, and I want to admit what happened by me. And when he admitted it, suddenly all the brothers stopped being suspect. Meaning until that moment, Yaakov didn't intervene. He said, I know someone here messed around and someone here did something wrong, but he didn't want to find out who started touching his beds. So Yosef told him it was Reuven, but Reuven didn't know that. Or maybe he did, and he was still such a tzaddik that he saved Yosef's life. Even though when Yosef reported to Yaakov that Reuven was the one who did it, Yaakov took away from Reuven's rights to have a double portion in the inheritance, gave it to Reuven's nemesis should have been Yosef. Because by Yosef writing on Reuven, Yosef gained. Now he had a double portion. He was told, you will now. That's what it says in Chronicles and Divrei Hayamim. Uvechalelo yitzuei aviv, when Reuven did what was wrong by interfering with where his father's bed would be, with which wife he would be that night. So Yaakov said, what a chutzpah. You can't be the leader of the Jewish people. And he took the rights of the kingship from him, yet to be determined who it would go to. And he took his rights to getting a double portion in the inheritance and gave it to Yosef. So now, who should Reuven hate most? Yosef. Who should be the most interested in Yosef's dying? Reuven. And that's why prophetically Leah called him Reuven. Reu, take note, ma ben beni le ben chami. My father-in-law's firstborn, Esav, gave up on his rights to the firstborn willingly to Yaakov. And what does it say about him? Vayomer, argad Yaakov achi. When my father dies, I'm still going to kill him, right? He wants Yaakov dead. For what? You sold him the rights. Vayistom Esav et Yaakov ala bechora. Right? Esav hates Yaakov. Why? You sold it to him willingly. By Reuven Baal Korche, it was against his will that they took his rights first. Yosef, that's what lost it. Reuven said, and he tries to save him. So, and the angel Gabriel, who has guided Yosef to his brothers, he's gone ahead of time down to Egypt. He flies down to Egypt, and he goes into Potiphar's house, and he takes care of Potiphar. Potiphar has an incredible accident. He's sawing a boulder or something. He's sawing a piece of wood. I don't know exactly what he was doing, but the knife flew and sliced off his male organ in a way that there was nothing left. Like he was cut so deeply. The pasuk says that the Gemara says Potiphar had nothing to talk about.
When did this happen?
When Yosef came down to Egypt, and Potiphar saw this beautiful boy, and he had such lust for him, he ran to the market and said, I'm going to pay top dollar, and he buys Yosef thinking that Yosef will be his toy, that he will violate Yosef and he's going to take him. And Hashem says, I'm not going to let that happen to Yosef. So even though Yosef was sold on the slave market as a naked white boy in Egyptian territory, and Potiphar had very lustful ideas about why he's going to buy Yosef, the Talmud in Tractate Sota says Hashem sent the angel Gabriel who caused Potiphar to become Parua. It says Potiphera. What is Pera? Our sages had a tradition that he was like sliced open to the point where there was nothing to talk about. He couldn't do anything male. Now, Chazal don't say what it means the angel Gabriel came there. So I'm giving you an example of what might have happened. Right? He was cutting a piece of wood and the knife went flying. I don't know what happened, what Chazal mean the angel Gabriel came there. But Chazal used that term to tell you that Hashem took care that Potiphar would not be able to do what he had thought to do with Yosef. So now Yosef's in Potiphar's house, and here we're going to shift to Stephen Covey, who told us what it really says in the Medrash Rabbah. Stephen Covey says, imagine you have this boy who's sold into slavery, everyone turned against him. It doesn't like anything good that's about to happen in his life. On the contrary, the worst person in society. I owe it to them. Look at what they did to me. Of course I should be an evil person. What have I known in my... What do you want from me? Everything I've experienced in life is evil. No one's been kind to me. My mother died when I was a kid. My brothers were not nice to me. I tried to be nice to some of them. They all turned on me. They sold me into slavery. What kind of life did I have? Of course I should be a menace, a psychopath. What do you want? I have every excuse in the book. What is the opposite? Yosef is constantly hopeful. Yosef sees the future. Yosef is constantly thinking, what's right? He has one question. What am I supposed to do now? What's right? Yosef, in everything he does, it says, Potiphar asked him, why do I see you mumbling all the time? What are you saying all the time? Yosef said, I'm praying. He says, really, what are you praying? So he says, I'm praying that I should do what you want, the way you want, in a way that will be successful for you. I am praying when I prepare your hot water, I'm praying that it should come out the temperature that you want. When I drink, I should be I'm constantly saying I should do my job. Life, he said that his success was always contingent on their bon shalom. Now we usually work the other way, We see our failures as their bon shalom's fault, and our successes as our own credit, right? I'm going to succeed because I'm smart. I'm going to succeed because I'm talented. Why did I fail? I don't know why their bon shalom did that to me, right? I don't know. Our failures are God's fault, and our successes are our credit. That's the way we look at it. But Yosef teaches us that any success he wants to have, even in being a good servant in Potiphar's house, he has to daven. That's a very important point. There was once a rabbi who said in a speech, he said, learn from Yosef, when you start your day, look at your whole day and ask yourself, what do you want to succeed in on this day? And daven about it. In your Shemona Esrei, stop and start talking to Rebbeinu about everything that you want to succeed in. And see what your days look like. And the people who attended that class would come one after another and tell the rabbi, I started doing what you said, and suddenly I'm seeing much more success in my life. Try it. Try thinking in the morning, what is important to me today that will succeed, and daven about it. Talk to their bone show about it. Yosef was davening all day long. What wine? Yosef, I'm davening, the wine should come out right. Taste didn't tell me if my tefillah was accepted. Yosef is constantly talking to their bone shalom. Now, I want to digress for one moment. When we have challenges in our life, and I wish upon all of us that we should never experience any challenge close to what Yosef experienced. When we have challenges in our life, our first thought, it's natural that we don't want to talk to their bone shalom. Because our feeling is, you did this to me. What am I going to talk to you about? You could have prevented it, and you did the exact opposite. I'm going to talk to you. And a person has to overcome that. And sometimes overcoming that is just forcing yourself to talk. Start talking to their bone shalom. You start davening, then it'll eventually, Bezat Hashem, be meaningful. But when you have a habit like Yosef, that it's a part of life, so then it happens. Now, the second point is that Yosef doesn't give himself excuses. Yosef doesn't say, because all these bad things happened to me, so I have an excuse. On the contrary, Yosef keeps asking one question: what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do now? And here I want to go into Rav Hirsch for one moment. Okay, let's digress from Rav Hirsch. We'll go to Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Rav Chaim Kanievsky said, this concept, Rav Hirsch says the same concept in Chorev, but Rav Chaim Kanievsky says it in a blessed say. The strengths and the weaknesses, everything is exactly the way it should be so that you will develop the way you're supposed to develop in this lifetime. There's nothing here that's different. I was supposed to have this balding head. If I was supposed to have hair, I would have hair. Part of my life is supposed to be this. End the story. It's not. Now, I do hishtadlus. I do hishtadlut. I know I keep banging my head, and when you have no hair on your head, so then you wound your head. So I wear a big yarmulke, and I try to cover. Not to cover my balding, but so that when I bump into things, there's an open closet or something, I don't need to get wounded all the time, right? You see, both people a lot of times have these things on their head, that they're wounds. Yeah, you see that. Now, I never appreciated why that happens, right?
So, can someone pray that they don't get bald?
Yes.
Even though like everybody in their family, they know I've gotten bald. Can they pray?
Talk to their mansham.
Can they try to figure out a way? Who knows? I'm going to just go here very short, not completely off, but can someone try doing that, or is that
no one's saying not to do it. But you say Shali called Sark. So says Rav Chaim Kanievsky, what you're really saying is, you've given me everything I needed exactly. I could daven for things to be different. I could do ishtadlut to do things different. But the question is, am I embittered when life plays itself out a certain way? How do I approach the things in life that are not working out the way I want? There's plenty of things that are not the way I want. Many.
Is it better to daven for every little thing? Is that like ideal?
Depends on how far you take it. You understand, it can become very bad for a person. So you have to live life, you have to be normal, you have to see how to incorporate their bon shalom into your life, and you have to see how to not be knocked off your horse, meaning don't get the wind knocked out of you. Yosef is in the worst situation in the world, right? He's sitting in shackles. A minute ago, he thought he was going to be raped repeatedly. He thought that's what's going to happen in his life. Yosef has nothing right. Nothing seems to be going right in his life. And yet he's talking to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and he's constantly asking himself, what am I supposed to do now? Which is a very important question. And sometimes people go through all of life and they never think to ask. They keep asking, what do I want now? Not what am I supposed to do now? One of the core concepts is you're supposed to ask, what's my responsibility now? What am I supposed to do? You know the Bill of Rights? You know the Torah? How many are there in Torah that tell you how to speak about rights? Of Torah you're supposed to give. Now, when you understand your responsibility, so if you have a responsibility not to hit, if you have a responsibility to pay me if you damage, I guess I have the right to get paid. But the Torah never talks about rights. The Torah talks about responsibility, because our attitude in life is about responsibility. And again, that question that Yosef asked himself, what am I supposed to do now? Now, Yosef also never gives up. So Yosef will 70 languages. Yosef will constantly develop. When people give up, they ruin their life. When Yaakov Avinu allows sadness to envelop him, so Yaakov Avinu loses 22 years of life. People have to know, sadness stunts your growth. You're allowed to mourn. You're allowed to recognize that something's not good. That's fine. That's normal. That's good. Fine. But then you have to move on. There's a mourning period, and then you have to move on. And moving on is that I understand Hashem is running this world. I'm going to tell you a story, and with this I think we're going to call it a night, because there's a lot to say. We didn't finish the parsha yet. There's still a lot to say. So we can continue, and those who need to go sleep should go to sleep. But I'll end with a story. This story took place approximately a year ago. I get a phone call from this person had just gotten remarried. And now they were a few months into their second marriage, with all the challenges that come with a child or two, I don't remember how many, with cancer. And they call me up from the hospital with a halachic shaila, but the introduction to the shaila is they were just diagnosed with a certain cancer, which the curable rate is under 3%, meaning 98%, I think, of people who get this cancer don't make it, right? And they're calling with a halachic shaila, but this is their diagnosis, right? About 8 months, 6 months into a second marriage, right? So I'm standing there, and I have to be the gibor here, right? I'm supposed to be brave. They just got the diagnosis. They called me. I'm supposed to say something right, and I'm fighting back tears. And I say to this person, let me tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a true story. Say there. I was at a wedding. I don't remember if it was a day ago or a week ago, whatever. I was at a wedding just now of a girl whose mother was diagnosed with this cancer 20 years ago. And when she was diagnosed with this cancer 20 years ago, they knew less about it than they do today. And the doctors told her that she has a tumor who married. So he said something. He said to her, I promise you will be at your wedding. We thought he was nuts. But that was the way he with it. And he said to her, I promise you your mother's going to make it. She's going to be at your wedding. And you know what? She was at the wedding. She was. The wedding was now, this past week. I don't remember if it was a day ago or 2 days. I don't remember when they called me, I said, he told her, and she was there. So I said to the lady, I just want you to know, 2% is a tiny number if all you think about is 2%. But when you bring the Ribbon Shalom into the picture, you don't need more than that. We're in the Ribbon Shalom's hands. Now we're going to daven. You're going to daven. I'm going to daven. And you're going to make it. You can't look at the 2% and say, I'm done. Now, where did I get the concept from? Yosef. Yosef didn't have no 2%. Yosef's idea was he's done. He had no reason to hope for anything. There was no logical way he was getting out of this. A slave never in world history made it out of Egypt. There's no reason that they should let him out. And his brothers want him dead. He knows that. They said we're better off selling him. What's he hoping for? But when you keep reminding yourself, the Machon Meir Balabais, remember what we said? When you put running when that's real, when you really understand that Hashem's running the show, so then there's never room to give up hope. Never. And maybe I should end with one story I grew up with. There was an American soldier in World War II who was a real klutz, right? Everything he did wrong. And he always, they do things and he'd get lost. And his whole life he was a klutz. And once one of his children or grandchildren saw a badge of honor that he had from World War II. And he tried to find out what the story was, why he got this badge of honor, because he didn't think his father or grandfather, whoever it was, had this, was such a successful soldier. So he asked him, what's the story? Now again, remember, I was a kid, we're talking about 40 years ago, right? So closer to World War II than now, right? Our principal told us the story every year. So his father or grandfather, he said to him the following story. He said, I was with a battalion of tanks. I was driving a tank, and I suddenly got lost. I had no idea where I was. Part one of the story. The Nazis saw that the Americans were advancing, and they wanted to finish off whoever they could as quickly as possible. So they got together a certain group of Jews, and it happened to be in that group there was a certain Hasidic Rebbe and his Hasidim standing there naked, and the Nazis are preparing the machine guns to mow them all down. And the Chassid looks at the Rebbe and he says, "Even now? What do you mean don't give up hope?" So the Rebbe says, "Yeah, even now. The Rebbeinu Shalom is balabait till the end. You don't give up hope for 1 second. The Rebbeinu Shalom's the master." They set up all the machine guns. Everyone's there and they're saying shells and they think they're done. And suddenly this tank rolls into the camp and all the Nazis pick up their hands, right? They're sure that the Americans are there. And this single-handedly took over. He had no idea what was going on, right? He got lost, right? This is the story. He got lost. He got lost from the whole camp. He had no idea. And he's looking, and suddenly he finds himself inside the Nazi camp. Now he's there. All the Nazis pick hands, and so that's why he got his badge of honor, because he single-handedly took over that camp by mistake. But he told the truth to his son or grandson. He said, I don't know. When I was a kid, I still had the newsletter that we got in elementary school, which said the story in detail. Now, I went searching for it, and that principal is no longer with us. But at any rate, so coming back to here, Yosef teaches us never to give up hope. Those of you who need sleep should go to sleep, and you'll get up tomorrow for Shacharit. And those of you who think you don't need sleep, maybe you should also go to sleep. And what?